At a lavish auction where only the wealthy dared to enter, a forgotten Mustang horse stood silently in the corner of its pen. Every eye turned away, until an old man in the back row quietly raised his hand. No one understood why, but that single moment would unravel a haunting journey. A horse believed to be dead, a buried deception, and a truth no one dared to face. High-powered lights beamed down on the sand-covered arena floor, turning it golden like honey, making the entire auction hall glow like a grand stage. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged bourbon, and fresh leather. Men in three-piece suits, polished leather shoes, and fine felt hats sat in rows of leather seats, leaning in from time to time to whisper calculated words. They didn't come here out of love for horses. They came for strategy, for investments, for prestige. That day, Prescott was bathed in rare sunlight after a week of fine mist. Outside, the red soil was still damp, but inside, the sparkle of wealth and power seemed to dry up every last emotion. The auction was being held at the Copper Ridge Arena, one of the largest and most elite horse auction houses in the American West, where national champions had been sold for millions. In the ring, a black thoroughbred had just been closed at $720,000. The winning bidder, a woman in an ivory gown with crimson lipstick, stepped forward for photos. A smattering of polite applause followed, more for formality than enthusiasm. Then the air shifted. A sharp knock of the gavel echoed. Next up, lot number 39, a 4-year-old chestnut Mustang gelding, 15 hands high, no official racing record. Who wants to open the bid? The horse stepped into the ring. It wasn't regal like the thoroughbreds before it. Its mane wasn't neatly braided. There was no glittering tack, just a sturdy frame, a broad chest, and eyes deep as desert night. It stood still at the center of the ring, not whinnying, not pawing. Still, but not the kind of stillness that comes from training. It was the kind of stillness that came from fear, and perhaps memory. Whispers rippled through the front rows. A young man curled his lips in a half smirk. An older woman leaned in, muttering, "A Mustang? That's a wild horse. Who buys something with no papers these days?" The Mustang blinked. Its ears flicked, catching every snide remark. Its nostrils flared, eyes scanning the crowd, searching for someone who might recognize it. The auctioneer tapped the podium again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a rare opportunity to own a healthy, mature Mustang. Who will open the bidding?" No one raised a hand. Then, from the very back row, a hand slowly rose. Weathered, sun-darkened, sinewy, yet steady. And a voice followed, hoarse but calm. "I'll offer $500. Heads turned. The bidder was an old man wearing a worn cowboy hat, a faded plaid shirt, and wide-legged jeans frayed at the cuffs. His face bore the maps of time, his eyes quiet and thoughtful. Someone chuckled. A man wearing a Rolex scoffed loudly. "That's mule money, old-timer. You plan on herding goats with that wild thing?" But Earl Maddox said nothing. He didn't flinch. He kept his eyes locked on the Mustang. The auctioneer hesitated, then slammed the gavel. "Sold to the gentleman in the back row, $500. The Mustang didn't move. It kept its gaze on Earl. No one noticed that when the old man stood, the horse tilted its head, ever so slightly, and when he walked closer, it didn't shy away. Instead, it took a half step forward. Its eyes gleamed with something unspoken, something uncanny. Earl stopped at the rail, studying the horse like a dream he'd once had to forget. A soft breeze swept through the arena, lifting straw from the sand. No one said a word. Just the silence between a man and a horse, and a sigh from the past. "Which one of them forgot you, huh?" Earl murmured. It was barely a whisper, but the wind carried it to the horse, and its ears stood alert. Earl led the Mustang out of the arena using a makeshift rope halter fashioned from an old bridle. People turned to watch as he passed. Some shook their heads. Someone snapped a photo and whispered, "That old man must be starting a rescue. Burying carcasses now?" But Earl didn't care. His battered truck sat in the corner lot. The trailer was a rusted metal box, welded back together at least 4 times. The door creaked as it opened. Earl led the horse up. It paused at the ramp, uncertain. Then, without a nudge, it stepped up slowly, one steady hoof at a time, as if it remembered the way. Earl shut the latch. The metal lock snapped closed. He climbed into the cab, turned the key. The engine coughed to life. On the windshield, taped with old duct tape, was a fading note. "Not every stray wants to come home. But if one follows you, listen. Driving the winding road from Prescott to Yarnell, the desert sun bled orange across the sky. Earl's truck crawled along cliffside bends, buffeted by dry winds howling like ghosts through the ravines. Inside the trailer, hoofbeats thudded gently. Behind the wheel, Earl's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, not from exhaustion, from memory. He'd shod hundreds of horses in his life, but the way this Mustang had tilted its head, the way it stood silent under the lights, waiting, as if knowing someone would come, no, it couldn't be. It was dead, long gone. Earl shook his head, muttering to himself, "Don't go crazy now, old man." But his hand, without thinking, tightened on the wheel. That night, as the moon climbed high and the land fell silent, Earl opened the trailer. The Mustang stepped out quietly. No snorts, no stomps. It lifted its head, inhaled deeply, then exhaled, a long, soft breath, as if it had finally returned. Earl led it to the empty stall in the far corner of his yard. He laid out hay, filled the water trough. When he reached to remove the rope halter, his hand froze halfway. The horse's neck twitched. He didn't know why, but he felt it deep in his bones. It had been here before, he and this horse. Maybe they had once belonged here. Together. Later, when all was quiet, Earl sat alone on the old rocking chair out front, holding a cold cup of tea. Night wind swept through. From the stall, a soft snort echoed, like a breath from long ago. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something long lost returning. April mornings in Arizona still held a chill, especially in the highlands of Yarnell. Rolling hills blanketed in dry, dark grass stretched toward the horizon. The first light of day pierced the haze, casting a golden hue across the weather-worn wooden walls of Earl Maddox's old barn. He sat in a pine folding chair, a lukewarm cup of coffee in his hand, gone cold without him noticing. In front of him stood the chestnut Mustang, the one that had brought silence to an entire auction room with nothing more than its gaze. The horse stood in the straw-covered stall, unmoving, as if it had always belonged there. Its ears twitched at every rustle of leaves outside the fence. Those deep black eyes had been locked on Earl since sunrise, unblinking. Earl took a sip of his cold coffee and stood slowly, brushing off his jeans. In his hand was an old bristle brush, worn from years of use. He opened the stall gate and stepped inside, moving like a man walking into his own past. "We'll take it easy, all right?" he murmured, his voice low, edged with the dry sun and dust of memory. The Mustang didn't flinch. Instead, it stood calmly, flicking its tail as Earl laid the brush gently on its shoulder. He started at the withers, his hand moving with familiar rhythm, the same way he had for thousands of horses before. The coat was warm and smooth. Dust and old dirt lifted with each stroke. Every pass of the brush felt like wiping fog from a window in his soul. "You're not afraid," he whispered, just like he wasn't. Earl slowly moved along the back, brushing down the flank. The horse remained still until he reached the left hindquarter, just along the ribs. Then something changed. The Mustang froze. Its muscles tightened like a drawn bowstring. Earl stopped instantly. He laid his hand gently over the patch of trembling skin. With care, he parted the dark chestnut hair to the sides, and he saw it. A scar. Not fresh. A thin diagonal line running from the back downward across the belly. The skin there was rough, discolored. A deep wound, once hastily stitched, had left a faint but unmistakable trace. Earl went still. His mind reeled. His hands stayed frozen. But his heart thundered like hoofbeats over packed earth. He had seen that scar before. He had pressed his palm against it in the pouring rain 10 years ago, on the night his horse, his flesh and blood partner, collapsed after a devastating fall during a training session near the eastern fence line of the Delaney Ranch. Earl stepped back. He looked the horse up and down, for the first time truly seeing it. "Am I losing my mind?" he muttered. The Mustang lifted its head and stared at him. No movement, no blink. He stepped closer again. With shaking fingers, he laid a hand between its ears, stroking down the length of its face. The same gesture he used to calm Duststorm when he first arrived at the ranch, wild and untamed. And then, impossibly, the Mustang leaned forward. Its forehead touched his chest. Exactly the way Duststorm always had. Earl stood frozen, feeling the horse's warm breath on his neck. He didn't cry, but his vision blurred. For a moment he was back in that spring valley, birdsong in the air, wind in his face, riding the most vibrant soul he'd ever known. "Duststorm," he whispered. The horse raised its head, its ears perked, took a step toward him, then another. Earl backed away, heart pounding like a war drum. No, it can't be. But deep down it was already clear. That scar didn't lie, those eyes didn't lie, and that instinctive touch to the chest, that remembered gesture, never, ever lied. This was Duststorm. The spiritual son he thought he'd lost, the horse he'd believed had been put down after the vet said it couldn't stand again, the horse he had sat beside for hours that night, gripping its mane, whispering apologies. But clearly, it had not died. Someone had kept it alive. Or someone had lied. Earl sank to the ground. His fingers dug into dry hay, but his eyes never left the Mustang, Duststorm, or whatever name it once carried. He felt like a man wandering through a maze of time, each step bringing him closer to a truth too painful to name. That night, he didn't go inside. He pulled out his old rocking chair and sat by the stall, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his side. Duststorm lay curled in the straw like a resting colt. It didn't sleep, but it didn't seem uneasy either. Its breathing was calm, rhythmic. Earl poured himself another drink, staring up at the stars. A shooting star streaked overhead. "Ever seen a falling star, Duststorm?" he asked, knowing there'd be no reply. From the stall came a soft snort. The horse lifted its head, ears pointed forward, eyes focused on him. Maybe it didn't know what a shooting star was, but it knew he was speaking to it. Earl set the bottle down, leaning forward. "If you really are Duststorm," he whispered, "then by God, I'm going to find out who lied to me." The horse kept its eyes on him. A breeze swept in, carrying the scent of wild sage, old timber, and something long decayed deep inside Earl's chest. Memory began to stir. And Earl Maddox knew. This journey home was only beginning. The Yarnell night wind howled through the old barn roof, whispering like breath in the dark. A crescent moon peeked between drifting clouds, casting silver light down into the narrow valley where Earl Maddox lived. His wooden cabin stood silent as a rock in the desert. Only the faint yellow glow from a window revealed that a soul inside could not sleep. Earl sat in his old rocking chair beside the cold fireplace, a mug of tea untouched in his leathery hand. His eyes drifted to the window where the silhouette of the chestnut Mustang, no, Duststorm, stood still beneath the moonlight, head lowered, as if it too were lost in memory. Earl couldn't sleep. 3 nights had passed since the auction. And every hour since he'd discovered that scar, his mind had been spinning in a loop of memory without end. He remembered everything. He remembered the day Duststorm first arrived at the Delaney Ranch, a newly captured wild horse, defiant, blazing-eyed like a sword drawn from fire. Earl had been the first to lay a hand on its neck, the first to make it lie down without a fight. They hadn't needed words or reins. "All it takes is a hand on his shoulder," he once told the younger wranglers, "and he'll know if your heart is real." Then it all shattered, on one bleak morning nearly 9 years ago. That day was supposed to be Duststorm's final training before his long-distance race debut. The wind was fierce, the arena still soaked from the night's rain. But Grant Delaney, the ranch owner, obsessed with rankings and profit, ordered a full-speed run. Earl remembered every detail. Duststorm exploded into motion, mud flying in thick clumps. But as he reached the west fence, a broken plank stuck up like a blade his front hoof caught. The fall was brutal. Earth and sky turned upside down. By the time Earl reached him, Duststorm lay still, hind legs crumpled, breathing shallow. The vet came fast. An hour later, the verdict was final. Compound fracture. He won't walk again. Best we can do is put him down. Earl begged. "Let me take him. I'll care for him. I don't need him to run. I just want him to live." But Grant wouldn't allow it. "Who do you think you are, Earl? We don't keep broken things. There's no room for sentiment here." Earl was pushed out of the stall. A few hours later, a plain white truck, no license plate, arrived. Duststorm was loaded up. No goodbye, no final look. From that day on, Earl never returned to the ranch. He resigned, took his toolbox, a weathered saddle, and a wound that would never heal. A soft knock at the window snapped Earl back to the present. He stepped outside. Duststorm stood by the fence, watching him. The wind played through his mane, casting shadows across the dry grass. Earl rested his hands on the railing. "You can't sleep either, huh?" No whinny, no stomp, only silence filled with understanding. Before dawn, Earl was already up. He stoked the fire for coffee, packed an old saddlebag, and paused at a drawer. Inside was a cracked pocket watch. one he used to hang on Dust Storm's saddle. The leather strap had rotted. The glass face was cracked, but the hand still pointed 6:47, the exact time Dust Storm had been taken. Earl stepped out to the barn. Dust Storm stood tall, his eyes burning like fire at sunrise. "We need answers, Dust," Earl said. "I don't believe you were put down. I don't believe it ended at Delaney Ranch, and I'm sure of one thing, someone lied." The Mustang snorted, nodded, almost as if he understood. Earl laid a hand on his brow, his gaze sharpening. "I'm going back to where you disappeared." That late morning, Earl drove his old Ford F-250 down the mountain toward Prescott, the location of the Copper Ridge auction house. The 60-mile trip stretched across empty land, but his thoughts were fixed on one thing: the records. At the main office, a young receptionist handed him a registration slip. Earl didn't fill it out. "I'm not here to buy another horse," he said. "I'm here to ask about the one I bought." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but per policy we can't disclose," a voice interrupted. "I remember you. You're the one who bought the Mustang." Earl turned. A young woman, early 20s, brown ponytail, rolled up sleeves. Her name tag read, Maggie Holt, staff. "I was the one logging numbers that day," she said. "I saw you walk out with him. That was special." Earl nodded. "Can you help me? I need to know where that horse came from." Maggie looked around, then gave a small nod. "Follow me." Inside the record room, Maggie rummaged through drawers, finally pulling out a thick file, stapled at the corner with a rusted pin. "Lot 39, she said. "Owner, Gilded Pines. No registered birth ID. Notes say, unfit for performance, transferred freely." Earl frowned. "No ID? Even Mustangs have range codes. You don't just get a blank slate." Maggie pulled out a small folded paper. Blue ink, sloppy handwriting. 3 letters. C.D. Weston. Earl's gut clenched. Clayton Delaney Weston, Grant Delaney's son. The man who inherited the ranch after his father's stroke. A man rumored to be colder than Grant and more ruthless. "I know him," Earl whispered. "And if he's behind this, then I've got a reason to return to Sierra Flats." Maggie looked at him, eyes wide with a blend of fear and awe. "You know, I think that horse was waiting for you to bring justice. It didn't just show up at that auction by chance." Earl clenched the paper in his hand. "No, sweetheart. He wasn't there to be sold. He was there to be remembered. And he knew. He wouldn't sleep tonight either, because the past had just opened its eyes." Afternoon drifted slowly through the town of Prescott, sunlight spilling over old tin rooftops and red brick storefronts. From a small office behind the Copper Ridge auction house, Earl Maddox stepped out, holding a crumpled file in his hands, its thin pages fluttering in the breeze like they were exhaling the secrets they held. But he didn't head straight home. On the road back to the ranch, he pulled off at a roadside diner called Rodeo Grill, a place where ranchers often gathered after long auction days. Not because he was hungry, but because he needed time to read, to really read, every word, every scribble. And maybe, just maybe, in the bustle of strangers, the weight of his memories might feel lighter. He picked the window seat, ordered a black coffee and a slice of peach pie. The young waitress with a high ponytail and a sun-kissed smile lit up when she saw him. "Long time no see, Mr. Maddox. I thought you were done with horses." Earl nodded softly. "I was, but the horse came back." Her brows rose, but she smiled politely and walked away. Earl opened the file. The first line read, "Name, unknown. Breed, Mustang. Sex, male. Estimated age, 9. Color, chestnut. Gait, normal. No ear tag, no registration, no lineage, no training history. A horse that had seemingly emerged from nowhere." In the margin, handwritten in blue ink, "Transferred from Gilded Pines, Sierra Flats region. Non-returnable." Earl closed the file hard. His chest tightened. Gilded Pines. A name he hadn't spoken in almost a decade. It had once been the most prestigious racing facility in northern Arizona, about 150 miles from Yarnell. Nestled between 2 dry hills and a seasonal creek. After Grant Delaney's death, his heir Clayton Delaney Weston took over. Rumors swirled. He sold off parts of the land, turned sections into a luxury resort, and leased out the rest for experimental livestock. Earl clenched the coffee cup in his hand. He remembered the young man who stood stone-faced as Earl begged to save Dust Storm. He remembered the cold reply that still echoed in his mind. "If it can't race, it has no value. We don't preserve memories here." That evening, when Earl returned to the ranch, he didn't go inside. He walked straight to the barn. Dust Storm stood by the water trough, calmly chewing hay. But when Earl approached, the horse lifted his head, stepped forward, and pressed his nose to the old man's hand. Again, Earl stroked his mane, voice thick with emotion. "We're going back, Dust, back to where they thought you'd been forgotten." The horse let out a long breath, as if agreeing. The next morning, Earl set off early. The sun hadn't risen yet. Dew clung to the hood of the truck, the destination Gilded Pines. And he wasn't going alone. In the passenger seat sat Maggie Holt, the young staffer who'd helped him dig through auction records. She showed up at 5 a.m. sharp, backpack on, camera slung over her shoulder, notebook in hand. When Earl opened the gate, he asked only one question. "You sure about this?" Maggie nodded. "I studied journalism, Mr. Maddox. I've always wanted to uncover what's buried, and I think I need to be part of this." The drive was quiet. Just the hum of the old engine, the whoosh of wind against glass, and the soft rustle of pages as Maggie reviewed notes on suspicious auctions and missing equine IDs. By midday, they reached the foothills of Sierra Flats. And then Gilded Pines appeared, like a ghost. Old wooden stables stood warped and leaning, shingles missing, walls peeling. Weeds grew waist-high. The iron sign that once proudly read Gilded Pines Ranch hung crooked and rusted through. The whole place felt like time had abandoned it. "No one's been here in years," Maggie whispered. Earl said nothing. He climbed down, opened the trailer gate. Dust Storm stuck his head out, nostrils flaring. His eyes widened. He hesitated, then tugged lightly at the rope. "You remember this, don't you?" Earl said softly. Dust Storm stepped down. He turned, looking straight at a crumbling stone stall near the tree line, its gate held shut with a rusted chain. Earl led him forward. The stall door bore the deep indents of hooves. Gouges, kicks, planks split from years of struggling, and in the center, a single carved letter, scratched into the wall with something hard. "E." Earl touched the door gently. "You were locked in here, alone." Maggie took photos furiously, scribbling notes as if spellbound. "Mr. Maddox, this wasn't a barn, it was a prison." Earl nodded, and he was the inmate. They were just about to leave when a voice rang out behind them. "You're not supposed to be here." It came from the shadows. A man in his 30s stepped from the cabin up the hill. Army jacket, ball cap pulled low. "Who are you?" Earl asked, voice steady. "Boone, I used to work here. Caretaker. Until the place shut down." He looked at Dust Storm, then at Earl. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "You're the one who bought him at the auction?" "I am," Earl said, "and I think you know more than you're willing to say." Boone's grip tightened on his cap. "I didn't hurt him. I was just paid to keep that horse. He's different. Unlike any I've ever seen." Earl nodded. "I know." Boone stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The person who brought him here didn't want anyone knowing he was still alive. They told me to hold him until they figured out what to do, but I couldn't stand how they treated him. Locked in the dark, no room to run, for 2 years. His eyes welled. I almost let him go, but I was afraid." Earl asked, "Who paid you?" Boone hesitated, then pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his coat. The ink had faded, but the signature was clear. C.D. Weston. Earl clenched his jaw. Wind picked up, scattering red dust across the broken path. He knew the storm of truth was coming. Nightfall in Sierra Flats didn't come gently. It fell like a ghost, heavy, thick, and full of omen. The remains of Gilded Pines lay cloaked in ash-colored dusk. Crumbling wooden stalls leaned at crooked angles, casting jagged shadows across cracked earth like the bones of a long-dead beast. Earl Maddox stood frozen before the chained stall door, staring into the darkness inside. Dust clung thick to every surface, but even through the grime, he saw it. A long scratch carved down a board, deep hoof gouges, old dried blood staining the wood grain. And at the center, crudely etched into the wall, was a single letter, E. Earl gripped the stall frame. "Dust Storm," he whispered, as if naming someone returned from the dead. Maggie stood behind him, hands trembling around her camera. Boone, the former caretaker, leaned silently against a post, his face hollowed by guilt and memory. "You shouldn't stay long," Boone murmured. "Clayton still drops by, not often, but he checks in. Last time was 3 weeks ago." Earl turned toward him. "You ever try to set Dust Storm free?" Boone nodded slowly. "I opened the gate one night under the full moon, but he didn't run. He just stood there looking at me, not scared, just waiting. Like he was waiting for someone else, not me." Maggie spoke up, voice low. And you're the one who sent him to the auction? Yeah. Boone scratched his head. Didn't know what else to do. Figured maybe someone would see his worth. Never thought it'd be you. Earl placed a hand on Duststorm's neck. It wasn't luck. It was fate. The wind rose suddenly, stirring dry weeds. Pine trees groaned against their age. Then the sound of a car engine echoed through the canyon. All three stiffened. Maggie ducked behind a split wall, hugging her camera tight. Boone backed toward the darkened stall. Earl stood tall, gaze locked on the dusty road. A black pickup truck crested the hill, headlights glaring. Clayton Weston. The truck stopped hard, tires crunching dirt. Dust swirled in the air. The door creaked open. From the shadow, Clayton emerged. White dress shirt, khaki pants, shiny alligator skin boots, salt and pepper hair slicked back, sunglasses dangling from his collar. His eyes scanned the yard, then stopped cold at Earl. Well, he smirked. Didn't think I'd see you here again, Maddox. Earl didn't flinch. He stood straight, hand still resting on Duststorm, like a silent claim. Clayton stepped forward. Heard you rescued a Mustang at the auction, and now here you are, sniffing around the place that used to be locked up. Funny how that works. It wasn't a rescue, Earl replied. It was a homecoming. Clayton's expression darkened. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I know exactly, Earl said, voice hard. I know who he is, and I know what you did. Boone exhaled sharply. Maggie kept her lens aimed, recording every word. Clayton slowly approached the stall. He looked into Duststorm's eyes. The horse reacted immediately, ears pinned back, nostrils flared, muscles tensed. A low growl-like rumble escaped his chest. He stepped back, then forward again, hooves pounding into the ground. Well, Clayton chuckled dryly. Guess he still remembers me. And he remembers what you did to him, Earl growled. Clayton narrowed his eyes. Then it understands why I wanted it gone. The wind died. Silence fell. That horse, Clayton continued, is evidence. Evidence of an insurance fraud my father built. Duststorm wasn't hurt like you thought, but he needed the payout. He needed a story. Earl's fists clenched. So you let me believe he was dead? I didn't make you believe anything, Clayton said with a smirk. You wanted to believe. He turned to look at Boone and Maggie. You all should walk away before this gets worse. Maggie stepped forward from her hiding place, voice firm. I'm recording everything. If anything happens, this town will know. Clayton stared at her, then laughed, cold and sharp. That town? It's been fed by this ranch for decades. You think they'll believe a washed-up farrier and a wild horse? Or the man who built their economy? Earl took a step forward. You can buy everything, Weston. But you can't buy memory, and Duststorm. He didn't forget. Clayton smirked again and turned back to his truck. Keep him then, but you won't sleep easy, Maddox. The truck roared back to life, spun around, and vanished into the darkness. Maggie emerged, still holding her camera. What do you think he'll do now? Earl didn't answer right away. His hand slid along Duststorm's mane. Then he said softly, I think he's afraid, not of me, but of this horse. Afraid that no matter how many years pass, memory will come back and demand justice. Boone approached, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. I have something, a recording, from a few months ago, a call Clayton made telling me to handle him. I didn't know if it was useful. But here. Earl took the USB. I'll need it. The road ahead was no longer guesswork, and the horse, once hidden in the dark, was now the light that would lead the way. Arizona nights could be cold, but that night was colder than most. Earl Maddox sat in silence inside his old wooden cabin. The soft glow of a desk lamp spilled over aged papers and scars too old to name. Outside the window, Duststorm stood beside the fence, head low, like a shadow reliving something only it could remember. On the table lay the USB Boone had handed him. Small, but heavy, as if it carried years of breathless silence. Earl exhaled, slid the drive into his battered laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing a single file, call recording Weston 2020.mp3. He clicked play. The voice that spilled from the speakers was unmistakable. Clayton Weston, crackling with static from a poor cell signal but crystal clear in intent. I don't care if it's alive or not. I told you to keep it quiet. No one sees it. No one knows it still exists. A pause. If that horse is recognized, my family loses everything. Gilded Pines, the insurance, the investors, it all collapses. Why are you keeping it, Boone? Out of sympathy? Don't be stupid like that blacksmith was back then. Earl slammed the pause key. For a second, he couldn't breathe. There was no more room for doubt. What he had felt in his bones, what fragments of memory had whispered to him across sleepless nights, it was all true. They hadn't just buried a horse, they had buried the truth. The next morning, Maggie arrived early, holding a thermos of fresh coffee and the wide-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept either. "I figured you didn't get any rest," she said, setting the cup on the table. "Your eyes look like coals that never went out." Earl nodded. "I heard it. All of it." Maggie powered up her own laptop, plugging in her audio editor. "I isolated the important part, cleaned out the noise. If you say yes, I'll upload it to Equine Justice, a national forum for horse advocacy and welfare." Earl looked out the window. Dust Storm was still there, silent, still. Like a witness waiting for someone to ask the right question. "Do it," he said softly. "If that's how we bring the light back in." Maggie nodded. "I'll do it now." Within 10 hours, the audio clip had exploded across the internet. Hashtags flooded the feed. "Justice for Dust Storm, expose Gilded Pines, the horse that remembers." People rallied. A journalist from the Arizona Equine Chronicle called for an interview. An animal rights legal group offered pro bono representation, and a young attorney named Reed Marshall arrived at the ranch in person, paperwork in hand. "Clayton Weston is being investigated," Reed said, his tone brimming with conviction. "The charges include insurance fraud, animal cruelty, evidence tampering, and perjury. You don't need to sue, Mr. Maddox. All we need is your statement and Dust Storm's physical exam. We'll take care of the rest." Earl looked at the lawyer, then at the Mustang who had never left his field. "All I ask," Earl said, voice grave, "is don't turn him into a symbol. He's not a case, he's a life." Reed nodded. "We understand." But that night brought another surprise. As the sun dipped behind the rocky hills, the black pickup returned. Clayton Weston stepped out, but this time, he didn't carry swagger. He walked quickly into the yard, eyes locked on Earl. "You win," he rasped. "I've been summoned. The insurance company is reopening everything. I'm going to lose it all." Earl said nothing. Dust Storm, standing near the corral, let out a low growl. Deep, resonant. Clayton's voice cracked. "Delete the recording. I'll double the payout. You can name your price." Earl didn't blink. "It's too late." The wind swept through the ranch, lifting straw and dust. Clayton's tone sharpened into venom. "You think that horse is a hero? It's just an animal." But before he could say more, thunderous hooves. Dust Storm launched from the far end of the yard. A streak of chestnut lightning through the dirt, he halted just short of the fence that separated him from Clayton, rearing up with a scream like a war horn through the night. His eyes burned, red and wild, like blood that never dried. Clayton staggered backward, pale. He still remembers. Earl stepped between them, calm and unshakable. "You can bury paperwork," he said, "but you can't bury memory. And horses don't forget." Clayton stood frozen, then turned, and walked away. No threats, no pride, only silence. That night, Earl brought his old banjo out to the back pasture. He strummed the tune he used to play when Dust Storm was just a colt in training. The Mustang didn't move, but he listened. After a while, he came close, rested his head gently on Earl's shoulder. Two old souls, two wounds, finding each other again in the stillness. "We're almost there, old friend," Earl whispered. "One step left," and Dust Storm nodded, as if he understood every word. The sun rose behind the Sierra Flats, casting a golden honey light across the roof of the old wooden barn. Dew still clung to the railings, shimmering in the morning breeze. In the paddock, Dust Storm stood still, eyes closed, like a soul that had passed through every storm and was finally allowed to rest. Earl Maddox was already up. He wore a faded denim shirt, the kind once issued to blacksmiths at racing camps decades ago. In his hand was a bridle, but not to fasten, to remove. The first police car arrived at dawn. Behind it, a legal team from the Arizona State Insurance Board. Clayton Weston had been officially summoned. The charges were clear: insurance fraud, animal abuse, tampering with medical records, obstruction of evidence. Maggie, now in a jean jacket and a quiet, resolute smile, approached Earl with a folded newspaper in hand. On the front page, a photo of Dust Storm standing proud in the paddock, his eyes piercing straight through the lens. The headline, "The Horse That Remembered and the Man Who Kept His Word." Earl took the paper. His hands trembled. He'd never imagined that one day his name would be in the news, not for shoeing horses, but for keeping a promise to one that should have died. Boone returned that afternoon. He brought a small trailer full of hay, a stack of wool blankets, and a carved wooden sign that read, "Dust Storm's Meadow, Freedom Can't Be Fenced." Earl said nothing. He just helped him plant the sign at the edge of the paddock. When the final nail was driven in, Dust Storm walked slowly over. Boone reached out, rested a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have done this a long time ago." Dust Storm didn't back away. He stood still, then bowed his head gently against Boone's chest, forgiveness in the purest form. That evening, Reed Marshall, the young attorney, returned with new documents. A temporary court order, all operations at Gilded Pines suspended. Ownership of Dust Storm was now legally and permanently transferred to Earl Maddox. "We may not get Weston in prison right away," Reed said, "but the door is open." Earl nodded slowly. "I'm not looking to see him locked up. I just want people to know we lived the truth." Reed swallowed hard. "You didn't just save a horse, Mr. Maddox. You reminded us that memory isn't just in our minds. It lives in the heart and in hooves, if you're patient enough to listen." That night, Maggie organized a small outdoor screening in the paddock. People from Yarnell showed up with folding chairs, popcorn, and a few acoustic guitars. A white sheet was stretched between two old oak trees, playing the video of Dust Storm's story, the audio recording, and a short interview with Earl. On screen, his voice cracked but steady. "I don't know why he survived, but I know why he chose to. He was waiting to be found again." As laughter and music filled the yard, Earl stood quietly near the fence. Dust Storm joined him, as he always did now, silent, steady, present. "You know," Earl whispered, "we're all a little broken, but that doesn't mean we can't go on." Dust Storm bumped his shoulder gently. A little girl stepped forward, Boone's daughter. She reached out her small hand. Dust Storm lowered his head and let her stroke his muzzle. "He's beautiful," the girl said. Earl smiled. "He's also brave." Weeks passed. Maggie moved into a small house down the road. She became a vet tech and started managing animal abuse reports for Yava County. Boone stayed too, helping Earl care for Dust Storm and starting free riding lessons for local kids. And Earl? He wrote. He wrote everything. Every memory, every wound, every truth that nearly stayed buried. One day, a letter arrived. It was from a woman named Hannah Weston, Clayton's sister. In the letter, she confessed. She had been the one to save Dust Storm that night, to hide him, to pay Boone to keep him safe, hoping someone would come looking. "That someone was you, Mr. Maddox," she wrote. "The horse remembered, and it turns out, so did I." Earl sat with the letter for hours. His tears didn't fall from pain, but from relief. Someone had finally said it out loud. The truth wasn't buried. It had been waiting. On the day Dust Storm was finally released into the back valley behind the ranch, a soft rain fell over Sierra Flats, the first rain in years. Earl opened the gate. No one spoke. The horse stood, eyes scanning the vastness ahead. Then he walked forward. One step, then two, then three. Each hoofprint planted like a seal, crushing lies, unearthing truth, and clearing a path for himself and for the old man who once thought he'd lost everything. But Dust Storm didn't run off into the wild. He stopped, turned back, looked at Earl, eyes glistening. Then slowly, he returned to the same stall, to the exact spot where he used to sleep. Earl stood there watching and smiled. A smile that didn't need words. If you believe that a horse can remember and forgive, drop a 1 in the comments below. But if you believe that no matter how deeply it's buried, the past always finds a way back, comment a 0 so we know you're still here with us. The story of Dust Storm and Earl Maddox is just one of many powerful journeys between humans and animals that we'll be sharing. Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next heart-touching tale. Because sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the souls the world once forgot.